Winston C. to Maggie T, the miners' strike and the Jubilee, the EC and how we missed the boat, to the various wars of Tony Blair, the Westlands case and Tarzan's hair. These are your revision history notes. Rhodesia in Africa, for every band bomb sticker. Should we have let Belgrano stay afloat? There's crazy 50s hooligans and back to grammar school again. These are your revision history notes. From every close and marginal, and George Brown dancing with the Cardinal, Harold Wilson and his Gannex overcoat, the Europe referendum Jack, who is alright, so send 'em back. These are your history revision notes. Hello and welcome to the first history revision video / podcast. This one is on the Labour victory in 1945. We'll first look at the background, and if you go back all the way to the First World War and what happened after that, Lloyd George and his coalition of Liberals and Conservatives have failed to deliver a land fit for heroes then, and therefore it's very much in people's minds how Britain was going to come out of World War II and how it would affect the country. Now, there had been Labour ministers in the World War II coalition war cabinet, including Clement Attlee and Ernest Bevin, and even though Labour had only won 154 seats in 1935, a lot had changed during the war. The Beveridge Report, for one, was accepting Britain was fighting for a better world. The Second World War was the so-called People's War. State intervention seemed like a really good thing. Everybody was pulling together in national unity. And Labour had recovered quite a bit since the 1931 split. And the Conservative government themselves were still associated with appeasement and the depression of the 1930s. If we look at the election itself, the election was called by the Labour governing body, the NEC, who wanted there to be an election straight after the E-Day, whereas Attlee and Churchill wanted the longest parliament there's ever been to go on after Japan had been defeated after VJ Day. So World War II ended in Europe on VE Day on the 8th of May 1945, and on the 23rd of May the Parliamentary Wartime Coalition broke up and Churchill returned the head of a predominantly caretaker government for the duration of the election campaign, so he was still in charge. However, he was booed at a Walthamstow rally, and then by the time July 1945 and VJ Day victory in Japan, there had been the election and Labour had won a massive majority of 148, which was considered a landslide. So why did the Labour Party win in 1945? Well, Churchill was overconfident. He made a particularly poor comment saying that for the reforms Labour wanted to bring in, they would have to have some sort of Gestapo to oversee them and to force them through. It was an ill-judged and ill-organised election campaign. A lot of people still fighting in uniform or coming back from fighting. It relied too much on Churchill himself, but then Churchill was seen as a wartime Prime Minister, and there was rumours that he was planning a war against Russia, and people were fed up. They were war-weary, war-weariness. Like I said before, the Conservatives were still associated with both the Depression and because of inept Conservative ministers, even though it was a national government during the 30s, it was predominantly Conservative, and also appeasement. All the guilty men were Conservatives. Rebuilding Britain seemed to be more in line with Labour's ideology than the Conservative government, and they hadn't really understood the needs of the people. So Labour would be better placed to carry out this restructuring of Britain, so people thought. The electoral system, as ever, skewed the vote. Labour only had to get 30,000 votes per seat, whereas Conservatives had to get 42,000 votes per seat on average. And the leading Labour ministers had gained experience and trust in the wartime cabinet. And like I said, it was Clement Attlee, Stafford Cripps, Ernest Bevin, Herbert Morrison and Hugh Dalton all serving in that cabinet. And they were especially in charge of the home front, which is where Britain was going to have to concentrate after World War II. Labour couldn't be depicted as unpatriotic anymore, whereas before socialism had linked to Russia maybe, and linked to an internationalism, and so the Conservatives could easily say they were being unpatriotic. Now these men had served their country in the cabinet, and that was obviously not the case. Plus, links with Russia in World War II, and after they joined our side, led to a little bit more respect for international socialism. That's what Chris Rowe says in his book anyway. Let's have a look at a little bit of historical interpretation then. Rowe also says a large percentage of army personnel voted Labour, and possibly due to pamphlets and leaflets going round when the war was over, but men were still in uniform, saying that they could have been indoctrinated. But both Lynch says this army indoctrination of supporting Labour was exaggerated, and Andrew Marr agrees and says the numbers don't really add up to that. Christopher Hitchens says this historic general election, which showed that the British are well able to distinguish between patriotism and Toryism, brought Clement Attlee to the Prime Ministership. Derek Murphy says it was probably the greatest British political upset of the 20th century. And Steve Fielding says the Beveridge Report proved to be the most significant political event of the war. Callaghan says the prevailing sentiment was no return to 1919 and the fact that Lloyd George failed to provide a country fit for heroes. Michael Foot in 1945 said, "We shall not have won the peace until every citizen in Devonport," where he's from, or his constituency, "and every other citizen in England has a good roof over his head, the chance to marry and to bring up children safe from the fears of unemployment, sickness and worry." Chris Rowe also says Churchill is seen as being lukewarm towards the Beveridge Report, which may be one reason why he was not voted in. And Marr, to conclude, has said Attlee is one of two genuinely nation-changing prime ministers of modern history, and I'll let you guess who he thinks the other one is. That's enough for now. Next we'll be having a look at Labour and foreign policy in the period 1945 to 1951.